Who is my enemy? Is it you? Is it them? Is it me? This great evil, where does it come from? The lies, destroying our minds, our bodies, our souls. Is this evil in me? Am I slave to my own freedom? A war is on. How do we fight?
A lot of what we are, what we struggle with, what we deal with today, the things that we wish weren't there, the thoughts we wish we didn't have, the reactions we wish we could take back, the ways that we behave and think, the things we wish we could change that we really struggle with, a lot of those things, if you've ever felt like stuck, like there's just this thing that I can't get over, all of that is part of doing the work in the past in order to move forward. Now, I want to throw this picture up for you for just a moment. This is mind-boggling, okay? This right here represents the dash on your headstone. You guys got it? I was going to do like a real one, and it just kind of felt weird to put someone's real tombstone up on the screen, and then other ones were like really Halloween vibes, so I just decided to go with a dash, okay? So I was sitting in a couple of different books this week, and one of the conversations that's come up many times is not just living a life worth living and kind of getting to the end of your life and looking backwards, but one of the things I heard from John Tyson this week is that dash, when you look at someone's tombstone, that represents their entire life. Like all of it. Like your entire life will be summed up one day right there. That's your whole life right there. And one of the questions that I'm constantly wrestling with, and maybe you do too, at least well, you maybe try not to, but then every now and then someone makes you think about it, like right now. And it's like, man, what is my whole life like? What's it going to mean? What does it stand for? What's going to matter at the end of our lives? Or as Stephen Covey says it, like we live our lives with the end in mind. Or like Tim McGraw says, I want to live my life for standing room only. Anybody? Country? No? All right, it's okay. Generational sin in my, it's a joke. I love some country music. Anyway, so if you find yourself stuck in like areas of growth or maturity or formation of becoming all that Jesus created you to be, or if you're stuck in patterns of behavior, actions, habits, ways of relating to others, emotional, mental health, all of those things, like no matter how much you go to church, no matter how much you study the Bible, no matter how many times you attend a city group, there are some way you're like, man, I just can't get unstuck. Does that sound familiar? That's the work that we've been trying to do in this series. And this series isn't going to fix us by any means. This has just been giving us the tools to partner with Jesus for change. And sometimes in order to go forward, we have to go back. And all of it has been invitational. So there's a really good chance that God has spoken to you a couple of times over the course of the last couple of months in like maybe a specific arena, but he definitely didn't deal with all of it, right? You didn't just like become Jesus 2.0 overnight. And if you did, you need to talk to me and let's like share your secrets, okay? So again, as we get into this final wrap up, I'm excited because we're ending on a high note, hopefully dreaming a little bit. And I'll just be honest with you, this is a conversation I was planning on doing it last week before the power outage, and God kind of gave us just a unique space to sit in last week, so wrote another message that night. But for today, I've been sitting in this message now for like 2.5 weeks, and longer than that when we wrote this series. And I feel strangely like disconnected and unqualified to have this conversation. And I think it comes from a place of not being who I want to be. Does that make sense to you? Like when we start to dream together, there's like these feelings of inadequacy or just frustration that come around like picturing a better future and living into it. And then now as a father of an 8 and a 6-year-old, this conversation especially begins to hit home of not only for myself, but how I impact my wife and my kids and then my neighbors and my city group and you guys. And so I'm going to approach this conversation with as much like kind of just humility and helpfulness as I can, while also just inviting you into my own journey. Is that cool with you? All right, very good. So again, if family of origin is one of the primary influences of who you are today, a lot of not so great things can come from that place. Would you agree? right? Like just kind of Thanksgiving with your family, or like holidays, or just family at all. You're like, ooh, there's just some not great things in my family. And some of you come from great families, right? Some of you are like, man, my family rocks. I come from a long line of awesome, and it's a joy and a privilege to gather with my family. That's awesome. But every family has their stuff, right? Like all of us, man, no matter how good, honestly, I come from a great family. They are, man, my parents have been incredible, and I'm really grateful, but every family has their junk, right? And so wherever you are, I mean, and some is heavier than others, so I mean, you just get to be honest about your story. But I talked to a lot of people. I don't know if you knew this, but Boulder's a really transient city. So like when you're walking down Pearl Street, 1 out of every 10 people that you meet just moved here in the last year, right? Those are the kind of stats that we represent in this city. And so for a lot of people, they move here for adventure. I ask, hey, oh, what brought you here? And most of the time it's like a job made a way to get here, but then Boulder's what brought them here, right? Like some kind of hobby or whatever, being in the mountains, which is always great. But one of the questions I've been pondering this week is I wonder how many people, maybe it's subconscious, but I wonder how many people are actually running away from their family of origin simultaneously. Right, like just trying to get away from whatever is back there and trying to start new, which is a good thing, right? That can be honestly really healthy. The problem is, and you know this, that no matter how fast and how hard and how far you run, you can't get away from yourself, which is so annoying. Like every morning you wake up and you're like, you're still here? Gah! That's where we are today. And so, again, we spent a lot of time on like the dysfunctional side and breaking bad patterns and behaviors and mental maps and habits. And so today we get to look at the positive side of, hey, not everything from your family of origin is necessarily bad, right? Whew. Yes, okay, good. Let's go there today. So not all patterns are bad. And so we've been looking at, hey, not only what do we keep, what do we stop, but what do we take and move forward? And that's the conversation today. And so let me take you back to Genesis 12. This is where that video started, but this is the promise that God makes, starting with Abram and then moving on to the nation. So this is a promise that eventually becomes fulfilled through Jesus for you and I. Every follower of Jesus in the room has taken hold of this very promise that we're about to read to Abram, which is really, really cool. And so the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. There's that word, which I appreciate that the video talked about. It kind of feels religious, and it also represents a sneeze and a prayer over a meal, and like we don't talk like that normally, and so it's really helpful to have a construct of what we're talking about. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So what's going on here? What is God promising to Abraham, and what do we have access to as followers of Jesus in this conversation? The Hebrew word here is baruch, and what it means when we talk about a blessing is to speak words invoking divine favor. Okay, so this is not a promise from God to make everyone like healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? Which is sometimes the assumption is it's all going to be gravy as soon as we start following Jesus. But that's, if you know Abraham's story, which we've looked at a couple of times, like God was faithful to them and his family, and he continued that blessing, but they were like massively dysfunctional. You guys remember that from a couple weeks ago? I mean, like, made your family look good, right? You guys remember? You're like, all right, I am not as bad as I thought. And so it's not a promise to make everyone healthy, wealthy, and wise. It's not a promise for Abram to have a smoking hot wife and a 6-figure salary. That'd be nice though, right? God did that for me, but like he didn't do it for Abraham. That's half true. I'll let you figure out which one's not true in that one. All right. It's not a promise to have an easy life, right? Again, because honestly, Abraham's story, you read it on your own. Man, the dude's transient. His whole family's transient. They go through bankruptcy, infertility, betrayal, doubt, despair. I mean, their life is hard, and there's all kinds of dysfunction on top of that. And so, okay, what is God promising? What does it mean to live with God's blessing on your life? And what it means is that Abraham will live under divine favor, under the love, under the approval, and the good intentions of God. He will be fathered by God. We use that language a lot because Jesus gave it to us. Abraham's going to be fathered by God through the highs and the lows of life. Does that make sense? That's what this blessing conversation is about. But there's a second part to it. It's not just that God will be with Abraham and there's divine favor over his life. It's also a promise that that blessing will be passed on, right? So it's not just for him. There's going to be this incredible connection to you will be a blessing. And not just to his immediate lineage, it's actually for all of the nations. And so it's a really cool moment that we get to see play out. And a couple of weeks ago, we looked at this story from kind of the negative side of all the dysfunction handed down in the family lines. Today, we're going to look at how the blessing has in that same family moved over and over again. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to not reread you all of the stories and the family lineage, but when we go from Abraham and Sarah, they have a son named Isaac, and then we go one more generation to his two sons, Jacob and Esau. You guys tracking with me? Okay, so that's the story. You can pick it up on your own time. Genesis 27 is where we're going to be in just a moment. But you can go read those stories for yourself. But let me kind of catch you up. Esau is the older brother. Jacob is the younger. And there's this moment when Isaac is old and he's mostly blind. And so then he calls Esau, the older brother, in. He says, hey, I'm getting old. I'm probably going to die soon. So why don't you go and kill some game, make my favorite stew, and I'm going to give you a blessing, which is like, okay, I'm not sure why it's connected to a bowl of stew, but that's fine. Let's go for that. And so then Esau goes out as the older brother, and he's going to go kill some game, bring it back, prepare a meal for his dad, and then his dad's going to give him his blessing. Again, there's that word. You're like, what does that mean for Isaac to bless Esau? And in the middle of it, again, there's lots of dysfunction in this family. Kind of his wife is around the corner hearing in, and she plays favorites, and so Jacob is her favorite son. And so then she catches this plot and comes to Jacob and says, hey, your brother's out hunting game. I need you to put this really furry coat on because your brother's hairy, and you need to trick your dad and he can't see. I need you to go in there. I need you to steal your brother's blessing. Like, go get blessed while he's out so that it's for you and not for him. Which is, you're like, that's messed up, is it not? That's some pretty dysfunctional junk, right? All right, so then Jacob, sure enough, goes in, lies to his father. I mean, blatant lie, totally massive deception. All that stuff goes down. Isaac lays his hands on Jacob, blesses him, and then he leaves. And as soon as he leaves, the story tells us that then Esau comes back in with the meal that he's prepared. He says, hey, Dad, here I am. Here's the meal. And here's where we pick up in that story, Genesis 27, starting in verse 31, look at that. So I had to follow my own notes here. He too, this is Esau, prepared some tasty food. Anybody, I just like that's the description, tasty food. Anybody else like tasty food? Yes, I like, all right, let's go. It's tasty food. And brought it to his father. Then he said to him, my father, please sit up, eat some of my game so that you might give me your blessing. You guys see it? And then watch, his father Isaac asked him, who are you? And he's blind, right? So he can't see. I'm your son, he answered, your firstborn Esau. And then Isaac trembled violently. That seem weird to you? Like, what's the big deal, right? Like, why don't you just do the same thing for, I mean, maybe be mad at the other brother for sure, right? But like, what, trembled violently? So maybe there's something going on with the blessing here that you and I miss, and definitely in the West, we're not in the first century, things like that. So maybe we're struggling to connect some dots here, but there's clearly some weight to what has gone down. Do you guys understand? You guys tracking with me? Okay. So then watch how then Esau responds. When Esau heard his father's words, and he just, hey, your brother came in and deceived me and stole your blessing, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me. Me too, my father. Do you guys hear it? What would create such emotion in this moment? What would create such response both from the father and the son, and this massive amount of loud, bitter crying in response to what has happened? See, what is Esau asking for in this moment? It's not money, right? Because, I mean, maybe an assumption is, okay, the blessing's connected to inheritance and things like that, and so it's not money. In the Hebrew culture, and then moving forward, even into the first century and with Jesus, and a blessing, I'm going to give you a couple definitions, is very simply saying, I want you. I want you in my life, and I'm going to take responsibility for you. And I'm going to give you everything I can to help you grow and mature into the best person you can be. A blessing from a parent to a child is that right there. Or another way to say it is a blessing is favor. It's I love you. I believe in you. I see who you are. I see who you're becoming. And I say yes to that. I pass on the favor of God and I bless you and I see you. Does that make sense? So this is a father's blessing to a son, and it was supposed to go to Esau, and now it's absent. You might be like, why can't he still do that for his son, right? There's other pieces here. In fact, we talked about it a couple of weeks ago that Joseph actually did it for both of his sons, right? So there's some things that change. But in this moment, you actually see that he does bless Esau, but it carries less weight. The words are less significant. In fact, it's kind of like a letdown. You're like, wow, that's the blessing that this dude gets left with. And what I want you to understand is that despite the dysfunction of this family, not only does Jacob go on to be blessed, but because of God's divine favor, indeed Esau still lives a blessed life, but there's something massively missing in that guy's life the rest of his years. You can go read his story. It's a story where he can be successful in some areas of his life. He's got wealth and he's got possessions, and maybe on the outside it's not too bad, but there's something deeply broken in that man, and it starts, I think, at this point. So here's what we're after today. Just a very simple, big idea is that we all come from a mixed bag of patterns in our family of origin. Some of you come from a background of faith. Some of you, Jesus was nowhere to be found. Some of you are first-generation followers of Jesus. Some of you come from backgrounds where faith was, it was present, but maybe it was a little bit disconnected. It was like kind of that go to church or do some religious thingies, but it had no real bearing on life and how your parents lived or how they raised you. And so there's all kinds of different approaches. Some of you're like still kind of outside of it saying, I don't really know where I stand with Jesus and with God and this church thing. That's all fine. We come from a mixed bag of backgrounds. And so some of your families, you have a great family of origin, not just your parents, but grandparents or whatever, but they still have issues. And other you come from really dysfunctional backgrounds, really painful backgrounds. Some of you come with parents that, tragedy, maybe someone passed away early, or parents were absent, or someone left in the middle of formative years of life. Like there's all kinds of different stories that make up who we are. And one of the struggles is, especially if our stories have been harder, we can look at our stories and kind of have a negative script over it and not really see any of the good. And the idea as we look at this story is no matter where you come from, at the very least you have life in this room today. You have the breath in your lungs allowing you life. And that in and of itself is a blessing, God's divine favor that he knit you together in your mother's womb, as dysfunctional as that scenario you might have come from. Wherever you are, the question is, what does it mean to be who I am? And for Esau, there was something uniquely connected to his father's blessing. There was a longing to be approved, to have the favor of his father over his life that did not happen. And there's a reality that for a lot of people in the room today, and a lot of people that you know, they grew up without the spoken favor and blessing of parents in their lives. You might have had parents that were present, but it was never spoken or never given. Maybe it was withheld intentionally. Or maybe they were present, but they were just so massively dysfunctional that they gave you lots of curses, and you're like, I got nothing good from my family of origin. Listen, no matter where you are, I need you to know that God sees your story and God has been present in your story up to this point. But we have to ask the question, what does it mean to be who I am, where I come from? I have this, let's see, I think I said it here. Yeah, I keep losing this, so pardon me while I try to find it. So there's this cool, it was like a couple Christmases ago. It's like this little plaque that my parents got, I think from me and my brother. I have one brother, we're both boys, and so they printed this cool little plaque, and it's got our last name on it. And it's basically like just a little memento from my parents about our last name. And it's interesting to kind of connect the dots over my family and begin to say, okay, where do I come from? What does it mean to be an Elkins? Like what are some of the broken things that we've carried on, and what are some things that need to stop? But also, what are some of the really good things that God has allowed our family to carry forward that I can then steward well and then not only pass on to my sons, but also to bless others with in my life? And so this I've been thinking about this all week. Like, what does this mean for me? The weight of a last name, and what will it mean for my kids? And again, so you just enter. Who am I? Where do I come from? What kind of blessings am I carrying and passing on? And Here's the deal. Listen, if you're a follower of Jesus in the room, the language that Jesus uses is you are adopted into the family of God. And you're blessed. That same promise to Abraham is God's favor over your life. And one of the things we have to then work out is, how does God's unique blessing work itself out in my life? Like, there are unique facets of God's divine favor in my life that he has a desire to bring into the world that's uniquely different than anything else that you can do. And all of them are beautiful pictures of God, but right, we're as different together in this room as any strangers walking down the streets. And so we've got to ask, like, what's that unique portion of God's divine favor on my life that then I am allowed to bring into the world around me? And as we've done this work over generational patterns of brokenness and sin, today I just simply want to invite you to pay attention to what's good in your story. So, like, do the work. What's good, what's beautiful, what's true, and what would it look like to pass that on, not only in like an immediate family of origin if you have children, but if you're single or you never plan on having kids or wherever you are, that you don't have to be married and have children to be a blessing. So this is for everyone in the room. What is good? What has God blessed me with that I get to pass on? So I've been thinking about my family of origin, and there's things in my family that have been really cool, like I've been musical, like kind of since a young age, and just like really enjoy and have a passion for music. I got that from my mom, and I have an affinity toward like mechanical things and working on things and working with my hands, and I got that from my dad, and I have a spirit of entrepreneurship that I got from my dad, and there's all these things that I look at, and we start to trace back different lines, and like, wow, look at all the things that God has given us, like really confident and good with money and being able to not only steward it well, but then help others. And I got that from my parents. Like, there's some really good things that I'm able to pass on to my kids. And Danielle brings some really cool things from her family of origin that then our two families collide and we bring those things together. So what are the gifts? What blessings has God given you that are both really, really practical and also massively individual? And how are you stewarding them? And the steward just is a fancy word to mean managing. Like kind of using in a way to make the most of it. And so as we do this work, I'm not only thinking about my kids, but I'm thinking about the people around me, my community, the church that I'm a part of, the place that I call home, my neighbors, right? That's the scope of influence that God has given me. And so God's agenda from that video, from this text over and over again as you read the biblical narrative, is he wants to bless the world through his people, right? You guys tracking with that? And so Jesus is the culmination of that, and then Jesus then hands that same incredible command off to his followers. And so then we're asking the question, man, if I'm blessed in the area of blank, then what do I do with that? There's this book called The Intentional Father that I have been sitting in maybe for 2 years now, and it's one of the best books. If you have kids, I just want to recommend it for a moment. It's one of the best books that I have read on the space of not only this conversation of the blessing, but also just the overall arc of helping your kids become who God has made them to be. It's by John Tyson, and it is incredible, and it's weighty, and it's heavy, and it's written from the perspective of a father to a son, but I think that anyone can pick it up, whether you have daughters or whether you're a mother or wherever you find yourself on the spectrum of dealing with kids. Like, it can be translated pretty easily to your story and then what you're doing for your kids. So I just want to recommend this resource for a moment to anybody that's like, man, I'm really trying to pay attention to not only stewarding what I have, but then how do I pass that on to my kids? Now, as we talk about this conversation, I want to give you very simply today, like 5 aspects of a blessing. And so the reason I'm giving you this is, one, to evaluate, hey, like, where are you today? Like, do you feel like you have been blessed, like received a blessing from your parents? Because it massively affects who you are and where you're going. We're going to talk about that for a moment. It's also how you pass it on to others. And again, it's not limited to children. It's also people in your community, your best friends, all those things, absolutely. This comes from a guy named John Trent. He wrote this book called The Blessing that I would also recommend. He does a really good job of just kind of tying the biblical narrative of like, what are we talking about when we're talking about a blessing, all that together in one book. So I highly recommend it. But 5 aspects of a blessing. So in order to actually give someone a blessing, what does it look like to bless someone? Number 1, he says, meaningful and appropriate touch. You ever had someone like just like shake your hand or give you a hug, like just one of those moments when someone like there's just meaningful contact, and then they say something really significant and it's stuck with you? Do you guys have any of those moments? Right? Isn't it interesting that those kind of go hand in hand? There's something about meaningful touch, and it's different for everybody, right? So some of you are like, no touchy, right? Like don't get, and it's just from over here. And that's enough. You're like, absolutely. Thank you very much. And so some of us came from, family backgrounds where meaningful touch was there, and then other times maybe there was absence of verbal affirmation, things like that. So we'll talk about it in a minute. But meaningful and appropriate touch is part one of a meaningful blessing, to give favor to someone else. And you don't have to do like the Old Testament version. Like some versions are like, hey, come here and put your hand under my thigh. I'm trying to figure out how to work that in with my kids, but I haven't done it yet. But just for it to be awkward, I'm like, come put your hand under my thigh. I'm like, I don't know, sounds cool to me. So meaningful and appropriate touch. Okay, you guys tracking with me? Number one. Number two, for a blessing to be significant, is a spoken message. Right? Love needs to be spoken. You know that, right? I've met tons of people that said, I don't doubt that my mom, my dad, they loved me, but they definitely never said it. There's a gap there when love is not spoken and it's only demonstrated, and you know that to be true. So it's got to be spoken. Number three is attaching high value. So again, what we see in the biblical narrative is when a blessing is given, you're also giving high value to the one being blessed. Very simply, I love you, I value you. And the idea is before you've done anything to earn it or deserve it. So for my kids, for example, 6 and 8, they haven't contributed a whole bunch to the family legacy just yet. You know what I'm talking about? They've taken a lot, but they haven't exactly been like high contributors to anything that other than the joy of them existing, right? And so when Danielle and I choose to come and we bless them, we have meaningful and appropriate touch. I put my hand on Grayson or Asher's head, or on their back, or hold them wherever the space is that is appropriate in the moment, and then a spoken message attaching high value. And the reason, especially for children, that's so significant is because they haven't done anything to earn it. Does that make sense? And so for some of you in the room, you never received anything like this. And it's not just a one-time thing, right? It's not like an official bam, signed it off and I gave the blessing. Right? This is something that hopefully happens continually in a child's life. But for many people, these elements are absent in their life. And it's massively painful. So the idea here is attaching high value is, I love you just for being alive. Just for literally existing, you are valuable. Does that make sense? Feels pretty good, rather than you're only valuable because of what you do, or what you contribute, or what you don't do. And then number 4 is picturing a special future. And again, these are all from the book and kind of built off a biblical narrative. Picturing a special future. So when I can sit down and I can get on Grayson's level, and I can say, here's who I see that you're becoming. You will be this kind of a man. Here's what I see that God has put in you. In those moments, I did it this morning with Grayson and Asher, and I watched Asher's face receive it with joy, right? He's only 6, so it's not like he has the bearing of yes, Father, I will take this legacy on, and right? And he's just he just understands words of affirmation. But it was specific enough. I was talking about who Asher is. I said, man, you're one of the smartest kids I've ever met. And you're so thoughtful and kind. And you're really, anyway, I just had a list of things. And again, we have to partner, to attach high value, we have to partner with the Holy Spirit on this. Like asking God, who have you made this little kid to be? Or who have you made my roommate to be? Or this person in my life, again, doesn't have to be just a child. Partnering with the Spirit of God to discern those things. And lastly, it's an active commitment to fulfill that blessing. This is key, right? It's not like, hey, you turned 18, great, see you later, good luck with your life. It's an active commitment. I see who God is making you to be. I love what I see, and I am with you, and I'm for you, and I'm committed. These are the 5 aspects of a significant blessing. Does this make sense to you? And you're like, I'm struggling to apply this to my life, and I don't really want to think about my past because it makes me want to cry. I'm with you. Listen, James, the brother of Jesus, says that there's the power of life and death in our words, in our tongue. So the words that we speak, they bring blessings or curses. And so some of you have only ever had broken things spoken over you, and you live into that script. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. And so you hear parents that talk about the kids, he's just a terror. He's just a klutz, man. She's just so lazy, man. She's just too emotional. And we speak death over someone, and then we're surprised when they live into that. Whereas when we recognize the weight of our words, that what we speak over people, they become, that words become worlds. That's the power of a blessing. And so again, this is not just for your children. If your parents in the room, it's absolutely, listen, for moms and dads, it's so massively important. No matter the age, no matter the stage of life, wherever they are, this is massively important. This is also for the people around me, the community I'm part of, the church I call home, all of those things as well. So, as we reflect on this, I realize that one of the challenges is, man, I never got that. You grew up in a critical home, circles of influence, even peers that just spoke death over you. And so there's just narrative scripts that run rampant in your mind and self-worth and all those things. They struggle to even be anything other than the darker side of things. Let me say this. You need to be blessed. Every young child needs the blessing of their parents in order to flourish. And you, wherever you are on your spiritual journey, you need to be blessed. And for Esau, right, he lived an unblessed kind of like tragic life. His story is really, really sad because he never got to live into who God made him to be. And what we see in the story of Esau is this manly man who has made an absolute name for himself, who is successful in all of the ways that the world thinks are significant on the outside, but on the inside, he's still trying to drum up his own worthiness, striving for love and approval, something that he never got from his father. And I think consistently what we can see is that, man, what could have been different about his story if he would have received that from his father? You know, one of the things that exists in our culture today is the idea of perpetual adolescence, of like never growing up, you know, like Peter Pan syndrome, you know what I'm talking about? That space of just the struggle to mature and grow up and become whatever version of an adult and honestly, one of the struggles that we have in the West is we have like no, for most people, there's no like coming of age ceremony. Like how do you know when you become a man, when you become a woman? Like what's the transition? Like what's expected? What's different? Like how do we know when we step into that? Right? Some of you started being the man of the house at 8 years old, and some of you started being the emotional support for your home when you were 6. You know, like there's all kinds of challenging pieces to our story, and so then we grow up and we have no real ability to attach, like, where am I in this space? And I'm just curious, I wonder if one of the issues in our culture of perpetual adolescence, of Peter Pan syndrome, is actually just the breakdown of the family in the West, where people are living without the blessing of their father and their mother. And so then their entire life is about either trying to escape the things that they're missing or drumming up their own worthiness. And some of you might be asking the question, man, what if I wasn't blessed? What if there's absolutely a hole that I walked with my entire life and it's massively painful and I don't know what to do with it? Let me take you to Jesus as we end our time together. Mark chapter 10. People were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. But the disciples rebuked them. And when Jesus saw this, he was indignant. So there's this massive clash of values and worldview in this moment between Jesus and his followers. And so they want to keep the children away, and Jesus says, absolutely not. And he said to them, let them come to me. Don't hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. In a moment when children would have been just a burden and insignificant, Jesus says, absolutely not. It's for them too. Truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. And then Jesus does this incredible thing in the next verse, in verse 16. He took the children in his arms, he placed his hands on them, and he blessed them. This is Jesus in this moment for these children, and this is Jesus for you today. If you were never blessed by your father and your mother on earth, friends, I need you to hear me today. Nothing else matters. In Jesus, you are blessed by our Father in heaven. You are blessed by the God who knows your name, the one who knit you together in your mother's womb. You have divine favor over your life. And in the family of Jesus, we are being reparented into the family of God. And it's this beautiful invitation to receive God's blessings, to steward it, to acknowledge it, and then to share it with the world. And so a couple of notes. Listen, if you're a parent, I hope it's helpful for you to even just process very simply your own story, what you've received, what you haven't received, but then also what you're passing on to your kids. And if you are single or you never plan on having kids or wherever you are on that journey, listen, you are not only blessed, but you are meant to be a blessing to this church, to a niece, to a nephew, to others in the city. Maybe it's through foster care. There's all kinds of different spaces that you get to step in as the church collectively and let God use you to be a blessing. And there are tons of people I can think of right now that are already actively doing it in a variety of different ways. And I would just invite you to consider, God, what have you given me and what am I doing with it? I think of Stephanie here in the back who has done a beautiful job of just serving and being a blessing to a lot of little kids in this church. Aunt Stephanie is what my kids call her. And you're a significant blessing to my kids and what you're passing on to them. We're grateful for. I think of Kyle and Nicole who had just adopted a little boy and they get to invest their lives into Sojin and bless him and give him a home and love and care. I think of those that are involved in the foster care system that are caring for those that might only be there for a moment in their home. Danielle and I had a little boy in our home for like 9 days last fall. But we got to pour blessing over that little boy's life for the moment that we had him. Wherever you are blessed, and you are blessed to be a blessing. And those two things we should take seriously. That living an unblessed life can be quite tragic, but in Jesus we have the Father's blessing. Some of you, it can just be taking a friend to coffee and speaking words of affirmation over them. Right? So before you think it's really weird and you got to have someone put their hand under your thigh, or you know what I mean? Like, genuinely, it can be sitting down with someone in your city group and saying, here's what I see in you, and here's what's true about you, and I love who you're becoming. It can be true, and that can happen in a variety of ways. It can be for some of you, it can be with the teenagers in our church. Teenagers, it can be with the little kids in our church. And it's intentional. It's not like you just drumming up some useless words and trying to say some niceties. It's Holy Spirit, what do you say about them? What do you say about him? What do you say about her? And speaking it intentionally. And you'd be amazed at how God can use the simple process of blessing others to change the trajectory of life. So let me give you a couple of ways to respond today. Number one is asking the question over this course of the series, what needs to stop, right? There's brokenness, there's struggle, there's things that we're like, absolutely, this thing has to die in order for me to follow Jesus. This is out of alignment with the good, beautiful, and true life that he's inviting me into. We've done that work for weeks. The second thing is what needs to start. What's been absent in my family up to this point that Jesus absolutely desires to be alive and true and flourishing in and through my life. And lastly, what needs to continue? In what ways has God blessed you specifically and generally that you can steward not only for yourself, but then either for kids or others in this community, people at your work, people in your family, all of those spaces. So as we wrap up this conversation today, what I want to give you is the space of struggle that I feel. Because I feel inadequate in the space of managing the life that I've been blessed, believing that that's true at times, and then trying to be a blessing to my kids or others when also I'm guilty of the exact opposite. Where my attitude or my tone or my words have taken away and not invested in them. And the same is true over my wife or over close friends. And sometimes it's what I say, and sometimes it's what I should have said. Sometimes it's the things that I said in a moment when I'm not allowing Jesus to lead my life, and other times it's when I held back when I should have spoken words of life. And so I stand in this tension with you today of, man, I recognize the blessing of God in my life for generations. I'm so grateful for that, absolutely. And I desperately want to break some things that are broken in my life, or to see those things die and be removed and redeemed by Jesus, but I also want to pass on the good to my kids. And it's so hard. Some days I'm like, yeah, I freaking rock. Last week, if you guys were here, right, it wasn't recorded, so there's no actual evidence, but Grayson was like, my favorite part about you, Dad, is that you give me grace. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, Man, if you were in my home this week, you'd be like, man, I didn't see any of that. Right? Like, oh my gosh. And so there's this tension of who I am and who I'm becoming and living from that space and then being able to live and allow God to move that out and through me. And so next week we start a brand new series called Walking in the Spirit. And it's meant to tie together the space, the tensions that we feel of allowing God to continue to form us, of walking in the power of God's Spirit who has made us new and given us new life. And so I don't know where you are today on your spiritual journey. Some of you came from great backgrounds and it's beautiful. And so then just sit in that space and reflect and say, wow, here's all that God has allowed me to steward and figure out how to move it on. For others of you came from backgrounds where you're like, man, I don't think I was ever blessed. At least not wholly blessed, not completely blessed. Like I didn't have that. And I would encourage you, receive that blessing from the Father today. Even if you didn't get it from your earthly father, your Father in heaven wants to bless you. And for all of us, it's, man, how do I move this thing forward? How do I fill in the gaps of that dash in my life and make it count for something more than myself? So I'm going to allow God to do whatever he wants to do with our time. I'm going to invite you to pray with me for a moment. As we bow our heads and we close our eyes, this is just a moment of thinking about our own story and giving the Holy Spirit space to work. And maybe it's a simple question today. Before anything else, God, what do you say about me? God, what do you say about me? For others of us, maybe it's just a prayer. God, help me to see what you've blessed me with so that I can steward it well. For some of us in the room, maybe it's for the first time receiving God's favor over your life. That you are loved, that Jesus died for you, that he was buried, he rose again to save you from sin, to forgive you, to make you new, and to adopt you into the family of God. And maybe today it's receiving that gift of grace for the very first time. Stepping into the family of God. Trusting in Jesus and letting him make you new. God, all of our stories are very different. And would you help us to see the circles of influence where we live, work, and play? The spaces in this church and outside the church that we get to steward and to carry your blessing over our lives uniquely into the world around us. I think of so many beautiful pictures that exist in this church already, and I pray that you would multiply them. That through the power of your Spirit, there is so much more for this church to give, because there's so much more of your grace to receive. So God, help us to sit in your favor this morning, to receive your blessing, and then to live from that place. It's in Jesus' name. Amen.